Today is our 13th town hall. Today, July 27th, if you can imagine how long this coronavirus environment has been impacting us. Welcome to our 13th town hall for CARES 4.0-ish.
Ish. I like that. Like you said, we kind of talked about this a couple of weeks ago, and we thought, oh yeah, this is going to be a slam dunk. It's going to be reporting on what's been passed and kind of deciphering through all of the minutia. When in reality, what it is I'm going to date myself. It's turning me into Karnak the magician to try and figure out what's actually going to be in this particular act. So any Johnny Carson days people will remember who Karnak the magician is, but that probably eliminates about, I don't know, 70% of the people on this call. So
half of our participants on today's call, yes.
Exactly, yeah.
But that's perfectly fine. So what you're saying is that this is going to be sausage making in its best. They're just going to cram a bunch of stuff through, be vague, and then fix it later?
Yeah, I think that's probably what we're looking at, because I know we're jumping way ahead in the presentation a bit, but Congress is supposedly going to be out of session in August. Well, we're pretty darn close to August, and there's I think a big gap between the House bill and what the Senate is proposing right now. And so it very well may be like the original CARES Act, which is, pass it and then let's, basically let people like all of us pick up all the pieces and try and figure out what the heck we do with it. So I think that's probably what's going to happen. But I think there are certain things, and we'll walk through our slides here, but I think there are certain things that are most likely going to be in this. So I want to make sure everyone knows this is not law yet. And it very well and most likely will be slightly different, if not completely different, than what we're going to talk about. So I will probably give you, as I walk through this, my best guess, and maybe even put a little bit of what percentage chance something like this that's going to happen. So I'll just dive right in since we moved into the first slide there. There will be a CARES 4 Act. I don't know if they're going to call it CARES 4. That's what the Senate's calling it right now. I think the HEROES Act is what House is calling it. So who knows what they're actually going to call it, but there will be something. And I think it's going to be fairly urgent. One of the main reasons is because of the unemployment, the additional 600 that ran out on the 25th of July. So I think they have some urgency. What they have urgency to put in after the unemployment is going to be the big question. So the first one on PPP forgiveness, there is some very serious talk, and this one I think is probably more likely than not that it will happen, that there will be loans under a certain amount that will be automatically forgiven. Now, when I say automatically forgiven, does that mean you just have to sign a piece of paper with your lender to basically dissolve the note and basically everyone wipes their hands and walks away and you don't have to pay anything? I think that's probably what's going to happen. The number I've heard most often is the $150,000 and below. Mnuchin, I think it was a Wall Street Journal article, he had mentioned that 86% of the loans were, of the total number of loans, 86% of the total number were under 150,000. And so that would be a nice way to draw a line and have the SBA and the banks focus on the larger 14% of the loans out there. I have heard a number as high as $350,000. I don't think that's going to fly, but if I was a betting person, I'm going to say it's $150,000 is going to be that mark. Big question is what happens. Yeah, go ahead, Pete, before I move on to that.
Well, so I think what I heard you say is, so there's an appetite to wipe out 86% of the loans because they really want to have the banks and the SBA analyze and spend a lot more time and energy on that remaining 14%. I mean, that's a fair assessment, is that they're really going to be, that's where we have to make sure our books are in order and our ratios are matching, and et cetera?
Yeah, I think that's one aspect. I think the other aspect is, it's onerous and cumbersome to do these loan forgiveness applications. And if you're under $150,000, it's they don't these companies typically don't have a lot of horsepower to get that done. And so I think they wanted to give the companies a break on that as well. I think in terms of really focus, I still see that $2 million and above mark as a real big intentional focus by SBA and banks. So what's going to happen between 150 and 2 million? I think it's going to be, make sure you have your I's dotted and T's crossed, but I don't think you're going to have this level of scrutiny that you're going to have unless you're above 2 million bucks.
Okay.
The $10,000 EIDL grant, if you guys remember when you applied for an EIDL loan, most of the time, although I've seen some discrepancies in this rule, most of the time is you apply for the EIDL loan, and then within a very short period of time, you get a deposit of 10,000 bucks put into your account until the SBA processes your EIDL loan. That $10,000 is supposed to come off of the top of your loan forgiveness. So for example, if you had a $200,000 PPP loan, and your ratios are good, you spent your percentages, you spent all the money the way you needed to, and you got this $10,000 EIDL grant, you would basically, your max forgiveness would be $190,000, not the $200,000, because you got this $10,000 grant. I don't know what will happen if you are under that $150,000 rule where they're going to just say, hey, we're going to forgive everything. I don't know what's going to happen to that $10,000. I have not seen anyone even discuss that. This is that sausage probably that no one's even thought about that. Like, oh,
as a body come down the road.
That. Yes, exactly. There will probably be an interim final rule or some sort of FAQ on that. And
we're into the seventh interim final rule right now, aren't we?
Yeah, it's something I've lost track. I have yet to find someone that can help define what interim final rule actually means. So to me, I need an attorney. Maybe Dennis can help with that. Maybe he can help define that. So. But see, if I ask Dennis, he's going to charge me. Yeah, so I don't want that.
No. We did get a question in, though, and this is, I think, directed to you, Matt, and it's regarding the PPP forgiveness. And the base question is there an optimal way to request which expenses are used for forgiveness? So they provide an example. Does using the full amount for payroll look better than using the funds for a combination of payroll and or rent? Or is it more advantageous to select expenses that are not split between pre and post funding, et cetera? Do you know what she's asking?
Yes, I do. And so that's basically, it's like if you used up all of your PPP funds on payroll alone, then you really don't even have to worry about rent or other things that, that may come into play, right? Because you've used up, you went way over the 70%, the 75%, the 60%, whatever percentage you want. You've used up 100% of your PPP funds with just payroll. I think on the surface, the way it looks, hey, that's what they're trying to do is make sure that these funds were used to pay your employees. But the law is the law, and you are able to use rent, utilities, and what have you. There is a little bit of a nuance in terms of if you got funded in the middle of a pay period, you actually have to split that pay period, in order to, it's an accounting, a little bit of a mess, if you will, to kind of split that up. But I will say that most payroll companies are doing a really good job of allowing you to be able to put certain date parameters on pulling these reports. I know Paylocity has that. I know ADP has that. And so one thing I am going to say, and it dovetails into a little bit of a bullet point I'm going to talk about in a minute, and I just don't want to get too much into taxability in the minutia here, but if you, the PPP funds were allowed to be used for mortgage payments. And then the IRS came out and said that any funds that are used to support the loan forgiveness for your PPP are not going to be tax deductible. That was a big blow, and I actually think that's going to be in this CARES 4.0 Act to basically make them tax deductible, because what effectively that does is it makes your PPP funds taxable. You're going to pay, you used to have those deductions and now you don't. If you are using, if you have a mortgage, it does make a significant difference into what expenses you want to pull into for your loan forgiveness application, because a mortgage payment is not deductible for tax purposes. But if you can use that instead of being deductible for tax purposes, you can now use that to justify your PPP loan forgiveness. You've effectively moved these PPP, let's say the payroll amounts that you just elected not to use for PPP forgiveness, moved it over in place of your mortgage. I know that's really technical and it probably got lost in there, but if you have a mortgage, we probably should talk and have a quick discussion. I did verify that with our tax partner in charge, and she's like, "Oh, I didn't even think about that." But yeah, you've effectively shifted those funds over to make them now deductible instead of if you use all your payroll stuff. You can now move those payrolls that you didn't use and move it over to true tax deductible expenses. Dead silence. I figured that. Yeah. I said, I just want to make sure we get it clear. If you have a mortgage and you're using these funds for mortgage, we need to talk in more depth, because it does make a difference. Other than that, I don't think it makes a whole lot of difference. So I would use whatever's the most easy to calculate.
See, I think when we had a town hall 2 weeks ago, I think it was, when Rob was on, kind of talking about brand survival and just, ways employers should be thinking about forward-thinking projects, et cetera, like that. And then my initial response was, I felt like I was drinking from a fire hose.
Yeah.
I think that's what you are trying to accomplish right now.
I know. That's why I'm not a tax person, right? My background is actually audit and CFO, but I know enough to be dangerous.
Right.
Yeah, so moving on to the...
So the summary of that, though, is that, I mean, not to be flippant, but the summary of that is that mortgage payments are being impacted in really another unforeseen way. And so really you have to sit down with a tax professional that you work with. If you have questions, you can call Matt and his group, and just really kind of talk it through just to see what impact it actually has. Is that fair?
Yes, I think that's a fair way to put it. So the last point that I want to make on this, going back to that previous slide, is there is talk about a second PPP issuance for smaller companies under 300 and can prove a pretty significant loss in revenue. I'm going to say that's less than 50%, but I could be wrong. That one is kind of on the bubble to me. I think the non-deductibility of expenses used in your PPP forgiveness, that's one I was just alluding to a little bit. That one, I'm going to say that's probably a better chance than not that that's going to get fixed. I'll just give you a kind of a quick example of what that means. Is let's say that you have $1 million of income, and you have just a regular year you have $800,000 of expense, so you have net income of $200,000. I'll say taxable income of $200,000. Well, now let's say that you also got a $100,000 PPP loan, and you use $100,000 of expenses that you normally would deduct in that $800,000. You use that for your PPP loan forgiveness. You now have, again, assuming the same year, $1 million of income, but you only have $700,000 of tax deductible expenses, which means you have now a net income, taxable net income of $300,000. That's because of what the IRS came out with pretty early on and said, we're not going to allow you to deduct those expenses. Well, effectively, what you're doing is you're going to be paying taxes on that $100,000 of your PPP loan. It's not in the revenue per se, but it's on the expense side being disallowed. So that really needs to get fixed, because what's going to happen is you're going to have a lot of companies with a huge tax liability come for their 2020 tax year. So that one needs to happen, and I think it will. I think that one's probably not as solid as the automatic forgiveness feature I've talked about before, but I think it's right up there with it, because I think people are starting to realize that, wow, this could put a huge burden onto our companies next year by doing that.
So 2 questions for you.
Yep.
On the forgiveness, so there was also a head count equation, and it still applies that if you terminate somebody for cause, that they don't hurt your ratios, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And then the second question is on the possible second PPP issuance. This is if the CARES 4 rolls out another PPP loan that we would all have an opportunity to go into based upon these parameters versus going to the existing PPP that's currently open and getting a second loan, correct? We can't do that.
That is correct. This would be whether it's a separate facility that they set up or a separate program that they set up specifically for these small businesses. Now, would they operate it and run it right through the same way that they've done these first rounds of PPPs? That's to be seen. My guess is obviously they would still use the same banks that they were working with, but it might just be it might be called, small business, lost revenue type, program or something like that. But it's not the same PPP program that right now, if you hadn't got a PPP loan, you could go out and get one. It's not that program.
Right, but we can't go out and get a second PPP loan under the existing program. That's what it's a one and done.
That is
so
correct.
Once ARC okay, got it.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Yep, and then next page. So individual payment. I think you're going to see something on an individual payment again. I bet it's probably not going to be as lucrative as it was in the past, and I bet it's probably going to be a little bit lower level of income. The interesting thing I was reading actually just earlier today that they're talking about differentiating between if you filed your 2019 taxes yet or if you haven't filed your 2019 taxes, meaning if you've just done an extension, because remember it's based on income levels. So there's some work that they need to do in order to figure out how they're going to execute that.
Right.
Extension of unemployment benefits. They're talking right now 70% of lost wages. I am absolutely positive that's going to be capped somehow, some way. If someone was making $1 million a year and they got laid off, I don't think they're going to have an unemployment benefit of $700,000. I just can't imagine that. But I haven't seen anything where it's capped. And obviously we know we have the flat dollar of $600, which just expired. So definitely stay tuned on that one. That one I am actually both of these. Well, this one, the extension of unemployment, I know that's going to happen. I'd say, well, of course, we thought this whole bill was going to happen, so I guess I probably shouldn't say it that emphatic. But
it's an election year; they're going to pass something.
Yeah, they will pass something. Yeah, and then they'll do something, and then the individual payment, I think that's pretty high as well. And then limitation of liability. I think Dennis, I think you touched on this briefly, that there is going to be at least the talk right now on for sure on the Senate bill is potentially a liability limitation of liability if you're following CDC guidelines as a company, as a business, or as a not-for-profit, whatever it is. They're going to somehow limit your liability should an employee or a customer or what have you get COVID. So that will probably be in the bill of some sort. I think Pete, you and I talked about this. That Arizona tried to do this on statewide and failed. And so I'm guessing. Yeah,
it couldn't even get out of one chamber, and they didn't even have enough votes to have the emergency passage of it. I mean, there's always a 90-day waiting period once something is once they adjourn and die. To when the things become effective, and if they have enough votes, they can actually bypass that and have it effective immediately. And they couldn't even get to that point. So yeah, it died in the vine for the most part.
Got it. Yep. And then one thing to note on so going to the next slide, Pete. There we go. The PPP forgiveness application. So basically what has to happen is banks have to have a mechanism to be able to submit your application to the SBA for that forgiveness. Well, there's going to be a tool. It's going to be a system, if you will, probably a web tool of some sort. But banks don't even have access to that until around August 10th at the earliest. And then limited information has been supplied to the banks in terms from the SBA in terms of forgiveness features. I think it's probably a little bit by design because they probably knew this CARES 4 or something was coming out, so they haven't necessarily rolled that out because it's going to change. Like for example, if they make $150,000 automatic forgiveness feature, that's going to change significantly the direction to the banks as to what they need to do. Then the last thing, and this is really cool, and see, Pete, I see you just pushed it out to, into the chat box. This is a very, very cool tool that AICPA took the lead and kind of took this. They've always had an Excel spreadsheet out there to help companies with their loan forgiveness application to start, dropping in all of their information. But they took it one step further and they really made it nice and simple as can be for the loan forgiveness application. And there's a Vimeo on it, as you can see Pete put that there. I highly recommend clicking on that. There's actually a website when you look at that video of where to go, and it's free. It's put out there by the AICPA, and I actually, no one's confirmed this, but I'm pretty sure that the AICPA used government funds, COVID funds, to basically create this tool to help businesses with their forgiveness application. So it's a really cool tool. We're happy to help you with it as well. But I think if you take a look through it, I think you'll find that it's pretty straightforward. So. And then so yeah. I can't believe
you didn't know about the picture. I wanted to surprise you with the picture.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. The numbers that we're talking about are just absolutely huge. So the Senate version is a trillion. House version, which is the HEROES Act, or pieces of it, 3 trillion. We mentioned that they are racing against the clock. We don't know what clock that is, but they always take a break in August. And so, to be seen. My best guess is something in the next week or two, we're going to have something passed. That's probably my best guess. So.
Yeah. And everything that you just discussed is really what has been kind of outlined in the Senate version of it. We covered HEROES. Gosh, that was a while ago. That was a month ago. But I think probably just the next thing that we'll be talking about is once they actually do combine the two or actually come to some type of an agreement, then certainly that's what our town hall focus will be on for that time.
Yeah.
Any other closing thoughts or?
Well, so there is still the Main Street lending program out there. What that is really geared towards is kind of the gap companies. You have to be under 15,000 employees, and I can't remember what the revenue number is, way in the billions. But then it's you have to have a minimum loan size is 250,000, but you have to have net income or EBITDA to support that a number. So if you don't have an EBITDA and it's a multiple of your EBITDA that is big enough for the 250,000, then you don't qualify for the Main Street lending program. I would just encourage you to take a look at that. It's about a 5-year loan. It is a loan. It does have a repayback feature. The first 2 years, there's some deferment of first interest and then interest and principal. And then there's the second year, it's a deferment of principal. And again, depending on the size of the loan, there's about actually 5 different programs under the Main Street lending program. So that is still out there. I believe EIDL is still out there. But I think that we're going to see some interesting stuff come out of this CARES 4 Act that maybe some of us weren't even aware of. But I know they're trying to work to help businesses, and so let's wait and see what happens in terms of any more PPP stuff or maybe some other type of benefit. I will say I know what's off the table is a payroll tax holiday is off of the table. That was something that was being talked about, and that is off the table. So.
Right. I think that was something that President Trump was wanting. He was the driver, I believe, behind that.
Yep, and it didn't make it into the Senate bill. So.
And then there were some, it's not restrictions, but I know EIDL had changed to some degree where they were slowing the faucet, so to speak, on how fast loans could be distributed and how much. Do you know if that has changed back up to normal? Because I think they were putting a cap on it, that they could only get like 50% or 15,000 or something like that.
Certain amount per employee. I believe there was a certain amount per employee. I don't believe that has changed. I believe those caps are still in place.
Okay, cool. And just for our final quick disclosure, just remember that Arkwood Financial LLC, Arkwood Benefits Consulting Inc., and Arkwood HR LLC, you obviously know us as Arkwood. We are independent companies of which we are not offering legal or tax advice. Our goal is to provide information to you for assistance in making decisions for your company. We leave the legal and the tax work up to the professionals, i.e. that's why we bring in smart guys like Dennis Hall and Matt Hatfield to join us today.